The coffee was still warm in my hands when I heard her say it. I was standing in the hallway, halfway between the kitchen and the little room they'd given me, holding a tray with 2 cups because I still made coffee for them every morning out of habit, out of love, out of something I hadn't yet learned to question. And through the gap in the kitchen door, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice, low and easy, the way you talk when you're sure no one's listening. She really should start looking for a place of her own, Daniel. This can't be permanent. It's our home now. Our home. I remember the exact weight of those 2 words landing on me. I remember looking down at the tray, at the coffee going still in the cups, and thinking that I should keep walking, that I should push the door open and set it down like nothing had happened. But my feet wouldn't move. I stood there in the hallway of the house I had lived in for 26 years, the house where I'd raised that same boy who was now sitting silent at the table, and I felt like a stranger who had wandered in and overstayed her welcome. My name is Susan Parker. I'm 58 years old, and until that morning, I would have told you I was a guest in my own life. I'd gotten so good at being small that I almost believed it was who I was. Let me back up, because you need to understand how a woman ends up standing frozen in her own hallway, afraid to breathe too loud in the place she owns. My husband Tom died 3 years ago. Heart attack, the kind that gives you no warning and no goodbye. One evening he was complaining that I'd bought the wrong coffee, and by the next morning the house had gone quiet in a way I didn't know a house could be quiet. For a long time I moved through those rooms like they were underwater. Charlotte is a big enough city that you can be lonely in it without anyone noticing, and I was. So when my son Daniel called and said things were tight, that he and Ashley were between leases and the rent in their old place had jumped, and could they stay with me just for a little while? Just a few months to get back on their feet? I said yes before he even finished asking. Of course I said yes. What kind of mother wouldn't? I told myself the house was too big for one person anyway. I told myself it would be nice to hear footsteps again, to cook for more than one, to have a reason to set more than a single plate at the table. I was so grateful for the company that I never once stopped to ask what I might be giving up to have it. The first weeks were good. Ashley was polite, Daniel was warm, and for a while the house felt full again. But somewhere along the line, and I couldn't tell you the exact day it started, because that's how these things work. They don't announce themselves. The house stopped feeling like mine. My things began drifting to the edges of rooms. Decisions started getting made without me, then announced to me, then eventually, just done. The thermostat, the furniture, the schedule of the house I paid for every month. All of it slowly rearranged around a version of the family that didn't quite have room for me in the center of it anymore, and I let it happen. That's the part I'm most honest with myself about now. I let it happen because I thought love meant making yourself smaller so the people you love could have more space. I thought that was what a good mother did. If you've ever loved someone so much that you slowly disappeared for them, if you know what it is to be treated like a burden in the one place that was always supposed to be yours, then stay with me, because this is a story about the day I stopped disappearing. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if these stories mean something to you, because there are more of them here, real ones, about real people who finally found their footing again. It helps more than you know. What Ashley didn't know that morning, what neither of them knew, as they sat there quietly planning how to move me out of my own bedroom and then, eventually, out of my own front door, was one small thing. A thing that had been sitting in a locked drawer the entire time. The house had never been theirs to give away. And the name on the deed was mine. For a long time after that morning in the hallway, I did nothing. That's the truth of it, and I've stopped being ashamed to say it out loud. I set the tray down on the kitchen counter. I smiled. I asked Daniel if he wanted more sugar, and I pretended I hadn't heard a single word. Ashley thanked me and didn't quite look at me, And Daniel stared into his cup like the answer to something was floating there. And I told myself I'd misheard. I told myself she was tired, that people say things they don't mean before their first coffee, that it was nothing. I was very, very good at telling myself it was nothing. I'd had years of practice. You have to understand what kind of woman I'd become by then. When Tom was alive, I ran that house. I mean, I really ran it. The budget, the repairs, the arguments with the insurance company, the garden, all of it. Tom used to joke that he just lived in my building. But grief does something strange to a person. When he died, some part of me that used to take up space just folded itself away, and I started shrinking to fit into the corners of my own life. By the time Daniel and Ashley moved in, I'd already spent 3 years apologizing for existing. So when the shrinking continued, when it started happening inside my own house, I barely noticed the difference. It felt like more of the same. It started with the closet. Ashley came to me one afternoon, all warmth, and said that since she and Daniel had so many work clothes, and since I really only wore the same few things these days, which was true, I'd stopped bothering. Wouldn't it make more sense for them to use the big closet in the main bedroom? And I could move my things to the spare room's little wardrobe. It was so reasonable the way she said it. So considerate. She even offered to help me carry everything. So I moved my clothes. My whole life fit into that little wardrobe with room to spare, and I remember standing there afterward looking at how small it all was, and feeling something I didn't have a name for yet. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been useful. It was more like watching yourself disappear a little and being too polite to mention it. Then it was the office. Tom's old study, where I still kept his desk, where I'd sit sometimes just to be near his handwriting. Daniel needed a place to work from home, and it made sense. Of course it made sense, and Ashley said they'd be so careful with Tom's things. I said yes. Within a month, Tom's desk was in the garage under a tarp, and there was a standing desk and a ring light where it used to be. And when I went in to look for an old photo album, I felt like I was intruding on my own husband's memory, in my own house. I want to be fair to Daniel here, because he's still my son and I love him, and this isn't the story of a monster. Daniel wasn't cruel. That was almost the worst part. If he'd been cruel, I could have seen it coming, braced for it, named it. What Daniel was absent. He'd look up from his phone when Ashley made a decision about my house and he'd say, "Yeah, Mom, that works, right?" And it was never really a question, and he never really waited for the answer. He'd become a man who agreed with whoever spoke last, and lately the last person to speak was always Ashley. I watched my boy, the one who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, turn into a stranger who couldn't quite meet my eyes when his wife rearranged my life in front of me. I kept making excuses for him. He's stressed about money. He's trying to keep the peace. Marriage is hard, and he's just trying to make his wife happy. And isn't that what I always wanted for him? I stacked those excuses up like sandbags against a flood. And I told myself that as long as I didn't make a fuss, as long as I was easy, as long as I was no trouble, they'd remember eventually that I was family, that they were living in my home because I'd opened it to them. The word burden wasn't in my head yet, but the feeling was already living in my chest, quiet and heavy, long before I ever heard it out loud. The kitchen was the one that hurt in a way I wasn't ready for. That kitchen was mine in a way nothing else in the house was. Tom and I had picked those cabinets together in 1994. I knew every drawer, every squeaky hinge, the exact spot on the counter where the light fell in the afternoon. And I came home one Tuesday from the pharmacy to find that Ashley had reorganized the entire thing. My spices, my pots, the mug Daniel made me in 3rd grade, all of it moved, boxed, or gone. "It just flows better this way," she told me, pleased with herself. "You'll get used to it." And she was right. I did get used to it. That's what frightens me now, looking back. How quickly a person can get used to being erased, if it's done gently enough and with a smile. I stopped cooking after that. I'd stand in the doorway of that reorganized kitchen and not be able to find anything, and it felt easier to just eat toast in my little room than to go looking for my own saucepans like a guest. I started staying in that room more and more. I'd hear them laughing in the living room in the evenings, the TV going, Ashley's friends over sometimes, and I'd sit on the edge of my narrow bed with a plate on my knees and tell myself I was giving them their space, as if the space hadn't been mine to begin with. There was a locked drawer in that little room. In it, among Tom's things, his watch, his reading glasses I could never bring myself to throw away, our wedding photos, was a folder. And in that folder was the deed to the house, with one name on it. Just one. Mine. I knew it was there. I hadn't forgotten. Not exactly. But somewhere in all that shrinking, I'd stopped believing it meant anything. A piece of paper can't help you if you've already decided deep down that you don't have the right to use it. And I had decided exactly that. Without ever noticing, I'd made the choice. The bedroom was next, and I should have known it was coming. It happened in the way all of it happened. Reasonably, kindly, impossible to argue with. Ashley found out she was expecting. They told me over dinner, and for one bright evening the old warmth came flooding back into that house. Daniel hugged me. I cried. I really did cry, because a grandchild is a grandchild, and for a moment I forgot everything and let myself just be happy. I thought, foolishly, that a baby might soften things, that we'd all remember we were a family. Then, about a week later, Ashley sat me down with that same considerate voice and explained that the baby would need a proper nursery, and the main bedroom, my bedroom, the one Tom and I had shared for 26 years, the one I'd already given up half of, was really the only room that made sense. It got the morning light. It was closest to the bathroom. And my little spare room, well, it was small, but a woman on her own doesn't need much space, does she? A woman on her own doesn't need much space. She said it like a kindness. So I moved again. I moved out of the last room in that house that still felt like mine and Tom's, and I watched them paint it a soft yellow, and I told myself I was being a good mother, a good grandmother to be, that this was what love looked like. I slept in that narrow spare room with my clothes crammed into a wardrobe meant for a child, and Tom's watch in a locked drawer, and I lay awake at night listening to the house breathe around me and feeling like the last guest at a party that had ended hours ago, too polite to leave. I want to tell you about a night that I keep coming back to, because it's the night the shape of the whole thing finally showed itself to me, even though I still didn't do anything about it. They had people over. Ashley's sister, a couple from Daniel's work, a few others. I'd stayed in my room most of the evening, but around 9 I came out to get a glass of water, and I walked into the kitchen. The kitchen I could no longer find anything in, right as Ashley was giving the tour. And I heard her say to her sister, gesturing around at the room I'd chosen those cabinets for in 1994, "Yeah, we've done so much with the place since we moved in. Daniel's mom lives with us. She's in the back room. She keeps to herself mostly. Daniel's mom lives with us. She's in the back room. In my house. On my deed." She'd flipped the whole world upside down in a single sentence, and not one person in that kitchen blinked. Because why would they? It was the most natural thing they'd ever heard. The old woman in the back room kept comfortably out of the way. And the worst part, the part I can barely stand to remember, is that I smiled. I got my water and I smiled at everyone and I said goodnight. And I went back to my room and I sat on that narrow bed and I could not for the life of me understand how I had gotten there. That was the night I opened the locked drawer. I don't fully know why. I couldn't have told you I was looking for the deed. I think I just wanted to be near Tom's things. the way you do when you're drowning and reaching for anything solid. His watch, his glasses, and underneath, that folder. I took the deed out and I unfolded it, and I sat there in the lamplight reading my own name, Susan Ann Parker, sole owner, and I remembered the day we signed it. Tom had insisted. That's the thing people never believe when I tell this story. 20-some years ago, when we bought the house outright after his father's inheritance came through, our lawyer had asked whose name should go on it, and Tom said mine. Just mine. I'd argued with him. Put us both on it? Or just you? You're the one who earned it. And Tom had taken my hand and said, in that quiet, stubborn way he had, Susan, I want to know that no matter what happens to me, no matter what anybody ever tries to tell you, this house is yours and nobody on God's earth can take it from you. I want you to always have a door that's yours to close. A door that's yours to close. He'd said it like a promise. And there I was, decades later, unable to close a single door in the house he'd made sure was mine, sleeping in the back room while strangers gave tours of my kitchen. I folded the deed back up. I put it in the drawer. I turned the little key. And I did nothing. Again. Because knowing you have a right and believing you're allowed to use it are two different things. And the second one had been beaten out of me so slowly and so gently that I didn't even know where to begin looking for it. But something had shifted, even if I couldn't feel it yet. Some small, buried part of me had heard Tom's voice in that lamplight, and it had started, very quietly, to wake up. The days after that got harder, not easier. Now that I'd let myself really see it, I couldn't unsee it. I noticed the way Ashley would sigh when I sat in the living room, the way conversations would drop when I walked in and pick back up when I left. I noticed Daniel handing me a smaller and smaller share of himself. A nod, a distracted, "Hey, Mom?" His attention already sliding back to his phone before I'd finished my sentence. I noticed that my mail had started getting opened, that my name had come off the shared calendar on the fridge. Little erasures, one after another, each one too small to fight about without seeming crazy, all of them adding up to a message I couldn't ignore anymore. They didn't see me as family living in her own home. They saw me as a problem to be managed. A burden, though nobody had used the word yet. And somewhere in that house, in conversations I wasn't part of, in a future I hadn't been consulted about, a decision was already being made about what to do with me. I found out what it was on a Thursday. I wasn't supposed to hear it, and it changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I'd come home early from my doctor's appointment because the bus schedule worked out that way. The house was quiet, or I thought it was. Daniel's car was in the driveway, but the living room was empty, and I was halfway down the hall to my room when I heard their voices coming from the nursery, low and serious, the door not quite shut. I stopped. I'm not proud of standing there and listening, but I did. I stood in the hallway of my own house, exactly the way I had that first morning with the coffee, and I listened to my son and his wife discuss my life like I was a piece of furniture that needed moving. "She's not going to just agree to leave, Daniel," Ashley was saying. "You know that. We have to make it feel like her idea. Talk up that senior community over on Eastway. The brochures, the activities, all of it. Make it sound like she'd be happier there, around people her own age. Once she's thinking that way, she'll go. And if she doesn't?" Daniel's voice. Tired. Not resisting. Just tired. "Then we push a little. Honestly, once the baby's here, there won't be room anyway. And Daniel, we've talked about this. If we're going to do the addition, we need the equity. The house is worth what? $450 now? We could pull enough out of a sale to buy something bigger. Get into a better school district. Your mom's rattling around in the back room of a house that's way too much for her. We'd be doing her a favor, really. Get into a better school district. Pull enough out of a sale. The house is worth $450. I stood in that hallway and the floor seemed to tilt under me because there it was, finally, said out loud in plain words. It wasn't just that they'd stopped seeing me. They had a plan. They were going to talk me into a senior community with cheerful brochures. And then, once I was gone, they were going to sell the house. My house. The house with my name on the deed. The house Tom made sure was mine so that no one on earth could ever take it from me, and use the money for a life that had no room in it for me at all. They didn't know about the deed. That was the thing that hit me last, standing there. In their whole careful plan, in all their talk about equity and sales and school districts, it had never once occurred to either of them to check whose name the house was actually in. They'd assumed. They'd been so certain the house was theirs to sell that they'd never bothered to look. To them, I was already gone. A formality, an obstacle, a signature they'd eventually collect. I went to my room. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I sat on the edge of that narrow bed and I waited to feel the thing I always felt. The shrinking, the smallness, the urge to make myself easy and quiet and no trouble. I waited for it and it didn't come. Something else came instead. Something I hadn't felt in years. Something so unfamiliar it took me a while to even recognize it. I was angry. Not the sharp, loud kind. A deep, slow, steady kind of anger. The kind that feels less like fire and more like the ground going solid under your feet for the first time in a long time. I sat there, and I let myself feel it. And underneath the anger was Tom's voice from that lamp-lit night, clear as anything. A door that's yours to close. I opened the drawer again. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't reaching for something to hold on to in the dark. I took out the deed and I read my name, and for the first time in 3 years, I believed it. Susan Ann Parker, sole owner. Not a guest. Not a burden. Not the old woman in the back room. The owner. The one whose name was on the paper. The one who could, if she chose to, close the door. And right behind that thought came the fear. Because this is where the story stops being simple, and I won't pretend it was. Because it was still Daniel. My son. The little boy who climbed into my lap during thunderstorms. Whatever he'd become, whatever he'd let happen, some part of me still saw that boy when I looked at him. And I understood, sitting there with the deed in my hands, that using it, really using it, standing up and saying, no, this is mine, and you are the ones who will leave if it comes to that, might cost me him, might end us. You don't tell your child the house is yours, and he has to go and expect the relationship to survive it. I could win the house and lose my son in the same afternoon. That was the real weight, not the paper, the choice underneath it. And I sat with that choice for 3 days. 3 days of watching Ashley leave brochures on the kitchen counter where I'd see them. Sunny Pines Senior Living, smiling gray-haired people playing cards, a vibrant community for active seniors. 3 days of Daniel bringing it up over dinner, so casually. You know, Mom, you might really like a place like that. All those activities, people to talk to. Make it feel like her idea. I watched them run their plan on me in real time, and now that I knew what it was, I could see every thread of it. And something about being handled that gently, that deliberately, by my own son. It burned away the last of my fear a little more each day. Because here's what I finally understood. Sitting in that back room with the deed and the brochures and my dead husband's watch, I had spent 3 years believing that loving Daniel meant making myself smaller for him. That a good mother gives and asks for nothing and takes up no space. But that wasn't love I'd been practicing. It was disappearing. And you cannot teach your child to respect you by showing him how quietly you'll let yourself be erased. If I let them talk me out of my own home, I wouldn't be saving our relationship. I'd be teaching my son, and my grandchild after him, that this is what you're allowed to do to the people who love you most. That love is something you can use up and push into a back room and eventually sell for the equity. I couldn't do that. Not to me. And, though it took me a while to see it this way, not to him either. So I stopped waiting to be handled. And I started, very quietly, to get ready. Getting ready didn't look like much from the outside. That's what I've come to appreciate about it. There was no shouting, no scene, nothing anyone could point to and say she's finally lost it. For 3 years, I'd made myself small so quietly that no one noticed. Now I got strong the same way. The first thing I did was find the folder and read every word of that deed slowly, the way you check something you can't afford to be wrong about. Then, on a morning when the house was empty, I called a lawyer. Not to start a war. I want to be clear about that, because people hear this part and think I was plotting something cruel. I called because after 3 years of being told, gently and constantly, that I didn't quite belong in my own life, I needed someone with a law degree to tell me the truth out loud. I needed to hear it from outside my own head. Her name was Ms. Okafor, and I'll never forget how she said it. I explained the whole thing. The son, the daughter-in-law, the back room, the brochures, the plan to sell. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mrs. Parker, I want to make sure you understand something. There is no situation you've described here. There is no dispute. It's your house. Full stop. They are living there because you allow it. You don't need my permission, and you don't need theirs. You need to decide what you want. It's your house. Full stop." I sat in her office and I cried. Finally, the tears I hadn't cried on the edge of that narrow bed. Not because I was sad, because for the first time in 3 years, someone had looked at my life and told me I was allowed to take up space in it. Do you know what that does to a person who spent years apologizing for existing? It was like being handed back something I hadn't even realized had been taken. Ms. Okafor walked me through it all, plainly. The house was mine, unencumbered. Daniel and Ashley had no legal claim, no lease, nothing. If it ever came to it, I had every right to ask them to leave, and there were proper, lawful ways to do that. But she also said something I've held on to ever since. She said, "The law is the easy part here, it's clear. The hard part is the kitchen table, and I can't do that part for you." The kitchen table. She was right. Because this was never really about who owned the house. I'd known who owned the house the whole time. This was about whether I had the courage to sit across from my own son and stop disappearing, knowing it might break us. There was one more thing I did that week, and it's the part I'm quietest about, because it's the part that still aches. I went looking for my son. Not the man in the other room who couldn't meet my eyes. The boy underneath him. I pulled out the old photo albums Ashley had boxed up when Tom's study became an office, and I sat on the floor of my little room and went through them. Daniel at 6, gap-toothed, holding a fish half his size. Daniel at 12, asleep on the couch with his head in my lap after a fever broke. Daniel at his father's funeral, holding my arm so I wouldn't fall, whispering, "I've got you, Mom." That boy was still in there. I had to believe that, and I realized that whatever I did at that kitchen table, I wasn't doing it to defeat him. I was doing it, partly, to call him back. To see if the boy who said "I've got you" was still reachable, or if he'd let Ashley talk him all the way out of being my son. I spent that week deciding what I actually wanted. That mattered to me, that I go into it clear, not just angry. And what I found when I dug down past the hurt surprised me. I didn't want to throw them out on the street. I didn't want to punish Daniel or humiliate Ashley or win. I wanted my home back. I wanted to be treated like a person in it. I wanted my son to see me again, and I wanted to stop teaching him, with my silence, that a mother is something you can use up and set aside. If they could learn to live in my house with respect, there might be a way forward. And if they couldn't, if it turned out that the only version of family they wanted was the one where I lived in the back room until they sold the place out from under me, then I loved my son enough to stop paying that price, even if it cost me him. That was the hardest thing I've ever made peace with. That loving him and letting him walk over me were not the same thing. That they had maybe never been the same thing. So on a Saturday morning, I asked them both to sit down with me at the kitchen table. The kitchen Ashley had reorganized. The counter where the brochures for Sunny Pines were still sitting, cheerful and patient. I made coffee, 3 cups this time, and I set them down myself. And I asked Daniel and Ashley to please sit, because there was something we needed to talk about as a family. I could see them exchange a look. That quick, private look couples give each other. The one that says, "Here we go. This is going to be about the senior place. Follow my lead." Ashley even started first, warm as ever. "Susan, I'm so glad you wanted to talk, because actually Daniel and I have been thinking, and there's this wonderful community over on Eastway that we really think you'd—" "I know about Sunny Pines," I said, and something in my voice, quiet, but not small, not anymore, made her stop. I set a folder on the table. I hadn't planned to be dramatic about it, and I wasn't. I just laid it down between the coffee cups, plain and flat, and I looked at my son, and I saw the boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, and I felt the whole weight of what I was about to do. Because once I opened that folder, there'd be no pretending anymore, no going back to being the easy one, the quiet one, the one in the back room. Whatever happened after this, it would be the truth. And the truth was going to change everything between us, one way or the other. "Before you say anything else about where I should live," I said, and my hands were steadier than I expected, "I need you both to understand something. And I need you to really hear me, because I've spent 3 years not saying it, and that was my mistake, not yours." Ashley's eyes had gone to the folder. Daniel's had gone to my face. For the first time in longer than I could remember, my son was actually looking at me. Really looking, the way you look at someone when you suddenly aren't sure you know them. "This is my house," I said. "It has always been my house, and I think it's time the two of you understood exactly what that means." And I opened the folder. Inside the folder was the deed. I turned it around so they could read it, and I watched their faces change as they understood. Ashley got there first. I saw her scan for both our names, for Tom's name, for anything, and find only mine, Susan Ann Parker, sole owner. I watched 3 years of certainty drain right out of her face. She started to say something about how surely the estate, surely Tom must have, and I told her, calmly, that Tom had put the house in my name over 20 years ago, on purpose, so that no one could ever do exactly what the two of them had been planning to do. There was no equity to pull, no house to sell, nothing on that counter but brochures for a place I was never going to live. But it was Daniel I was watching. Ashley was talking, and I let her talk. And the whole time I kept my eyes on my son, and I saw it happen. I saw the boy come back into his face. He looked at the deed, and he looked at the back room I'd been sleeping in, and I watched him do the math on the last 3 years. The closet, the study, the bedroom, the brochures, his mother making coffee every morning for people planning to sell the ground out from under her. And his eyes filled up, and he said, so quietly I almost missed it, "Mom, what did we do to you? Not what did I do. We." That was the first honest thing my son had said to me in years, and it was enough to build on. I didn't throw them out. I want you to know that, because I think people expect the story to end with a slammed door. It didn't. I told them the truth instead. I said this is my home, and I am done living in the back room of it, And I am done being handled and managed and disappeared. I said you are welcome here as my family, not as owners. And if you can't live here with respect, then you'll be the ones to find somewhere else because I'm not going anywhere. And then I said the hardest part, the part I'd come to over those 3 days, that I loved him too much to keep teaching him it was okay to treat me this way. Ashley left the table angry. It took her a long time to come around, and I won't pretend it was tidy. But Daniel stayed. Daniel sat with me at that table until the coffee went cold, and for the first time since Tom died, my son really talked to me. That was 8 months ago. The house is mine again. Not on paper. It was always mine on paper, but in the way that matters. Tom's chair is back in the living room where it belongs. My spices are where I can find them. I sleep in my own bedroom, and there's a nursery down the hall for a grandbaby who's going to grow up knowing that his grandmother is not a burden and never was. Ashley and I are careful with each other now, but careful is better than cruel, and some evenings we even laugh. Daniel calls me Mom like he means it again. I'm telling you all this from my own kitchen, in the afternoon light that falls on the counter the way it has since 1994. It's quiet here now, but it's a different quiet than before. It's the quiet of a woman who finally closed a door that was always hers to close. Loving your children never meant letting them erase you. I know that now. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to disappear. There's someone else I've been thinking about lately, a woman who waited 30 years to open a letter she was never supposed to read. But that's a story for another evening.